I think you'll all agree that those little guys are absolutely stunning. They are indeed jewels of the desert, better known to us, of course, as the central netted dragon. Welcome back, folks. Our mission once again is to develop the best possible captive environment for our featured species. Once again, we'll be trying to pay tribute to the animal as it occurs in the wild and also incorporate a whole range of critical life support features, this time, however, on a much more compact scale. I recently got out into the central netted dragon's natural habitat in search of inspiration.
Brown snake on the road.
That's close enough for a look, but also far enough away that we both live to see another day.
The central netted dragon is quite commonly kept, but if we want to get its enclosure right and make something really special, we're going to have to take inspiration from the place it actually lives. And yeah, they live here in the desert, but they live very specifically in these little valleys in between the dunes. In the extremes of summer, it could be 50 degrees right here, even hotter on the tips of the dunes. But that slight difference makes this slightly more preferable as a habitat for the central netted dragon. There's also more cover down here, there's more foliage, better places to hide and make a home. The other thing we have to carefully consider is providing an adequate temperature gradient, not just a hot and cold zone, but a variety of temperatures throughout the enclosure to try and mimic the microclimate that occurs in places like this. Now I'm just going to do a quick test here. Let's get a surface temperature. So I've got 34.6 there. Let's just dig down about 50 millimetres, see what we've got there. .6. So look at that, almost 10 degrees temperature difference in barely the depth of half of one finger. So the central netted dragon does some digging, and that's why it's trying to get down there where it's nice and cool so it can regulate its temperature. It's not only cool down there, it's also more humid, far more humid than it is on the surface.
I'm going to focus on the Simpson-Strzelecki dune fields as a point of reference for the build. But we do have quite a bit of latitude, because the central netted dragon is found throughout much of inland Australia across multiple bioregions. The Strzelecki provides all the clues we need to create an environment in which these dragons can thrive. A tangle of fallen acacia provides prime real estate, and the desert is not simply bathed in heat, but includes myriad microclimates throughout the day and throughout the year that these little guys will fully utilise. Central netted dragons are one of our most arid-adapted species. Some research indicates their preferred operating temperature could be as high as 41 degrees. To increase temperature, it can of course bask directly in sunlight, but it is also adept at utilising conductive transfer by shuffling its body into warm sand. Presumably this behaviour can also be used in cooler sand to reduce body temperature. The species is excellent at digging burrows, which are usually located under insulating material like rocks or fallen timber. These spaces stay cool in the day and also retain significant warmth when temperatures in the desert plummet at night. In this build, I really wanted to push the boundaries on what could be achieved to reproduce natural processes within a small enclosure. One aim was to reproduce both macro and micro climate effects in the main enclosure and also in the burrow system. I've leaned more heavily into the use of readily available tech to achieve this.
All right, we're getting really close to completion here, but before we cover up the framework with all of our finishing panels, while it's open like this, it's a great opportunity to take a look around the entire exhibit and go through all of the life support features I've incorporated to make this a real home away from home for our central netted dragons. To reduce weight, this time the lower portion of the frame is constructed of aluminium. The upper deck, lighting hood and burrow module are in welded steel. The burrow system is a critical component of the central netted dragon's ecology, so I've paid quite a bit of attention to it in this build. I've used a steel frame together with expanded foam to create two separate chambers which are insulated from the main body of the enclosure. The dragons access each burrow through an opening that passes through a tiny curtain. This way each burrow chamber can maintain a completely separate microclimate from the main display. The burrow structure is solid, but a deep layer of desert sand is also provided in the event the animals wish to completely immerse themselves. If required, the burrow chambers can be accessed by the keeper through the rockwork lid at any time, and I've set up a tiny camera system in each chamber to monitor how the animals utilise these spaces over time. A lot of people have asked me in the comments what kind of render I use for my rockwork, and the answer to this is it varies quite a bit. This time I've used an acrylic premix render, as I find it very workable and resistant to cracking. I've used real acacia wood from the outback and securely bolted each piece to the framework. Each branch functions as a tiered platform, similar to those used by the species in the wild. As the animal moves up to higher branches, it will also be able to access higher temperatures, which we'll discuss shortly. It's a rare event for a central netted dragon to drink in the wild. They obtain most of their water from their food. In captivity, however, this is not something we want to risk precisely replicating, largely because the water and nutrient content of a captive diet is very different to what can be accessed in nature. When they do drink, these dragons prefer for their water to be in motion or in the form of droplets. To accommodate this, I've designed for them a specific watering system. It consists of a reservoir and a high-pressure pump with two smart switches operating a pair of solenoids for different functions. Once per day, water is fired through a fine mister. The mister is aimed at a cluster of nylon strands mounted under the rockwork, where it forms multiple droplets to help trigger the drinking response in the netted dragons. The mister continues to run until water flows down the rockwork and into a tiny pond. On its way, the glimmering water flowing into the pond provides another natural trigger for the dragon to drink. The whole system can be easily drained for cleaning and takes up a very small portion of the enclosure, ensuring overall humidity levels are kept low. Arid species do much better in captivity when kept in conditions that closely mirror their natural habitat, so we'll need to carefully manage humidity in our display. This setup automatically manages humidity using two digital microcontrollers.
The first microcontroller operates a small dehumidifier, which keeps the main enclosure humidity below 40%. The dehumidifier is ducted into the enclosure through some PVC pipework via a vent concealed inside an artificial stone. The second microcontroller monitors humidity in Burrow 1. Burrow 1 is designed to sustain higher humidity than the surroundings, similar to many burrows in the wild. To achieve this, it is linked to the drinking water pond, which feeds water into an evaporator. This constantly feeds humidity into Burrow 1 and is replenished through capillary action. Burrow 2 is a mirror of Burrow 1, but it is left at the same humidity as the enclosure. This way the dragons can choose at any time which level of burrow humidity they prefer. I'm not a fan of the heating systems we have traditionally used in reptile enclosures. They typically consist of a heating element of some description at one end of the enclosure and a single thermostat set to cut out when the average temperature reaches a set value. My main objection to this arrangement is that it creates an environment that is technically adequate but completely static. The ideal temperature zones remain the same throughout the day and throughout the year. This promotes a number of issues for the inhabitants, not the least of which is inactivity. Inactivity is not only an indicator of poor environmental enrichment, but it also leads to obesity, one of the biggest killers of captive reptiles. That's why I'm keen to explore new ways of managing enclosure environments, and this time the enclosure uses a new version of my dynamic heating regime. I wanted to focus this time on simulating the natural ramping up and ramping down of total solar energy throughout different stages of the day. To do this, I've installed multiple radiant and conductive heat sources. The heat sources are grouped into 4 independent zones. Each zone has its own microcontroller. Each microcontroller has its own remote sensor, concealed in key parts of the enclosure to keep temperatures within a set range. I haven't settled on my final schedule and temperature settings, but let's talk through an example of how it can work. At sunrise, Zone 4 is activated. Zone 4 has 50 watts of power and the microcontroller is set to limit the temperature to 32 degrees. 45 minutes after sunrise, Zone 3 is activated. Zone 3 adds another 70 watts of power and allows a maximum temperature of 36 degrees. After another 45 minutes, Zone 4 shuts off and Zone 2 is activated. Zone 2 allows another 90 watts of power and a peak temperature of 38 degrees. A further 45 minutes on and Zone 3 shuts off, Zone 1 is activated. At this point the system is providing up to 190 watts of power and peak temperature at the sensor is allowed to reach 42 degrees. Roll on another 45 minutes and the system will now be only running in Zone 1. To ensure that a low temperature zone is always maintained, a cooling fan is activated on the cool side of the enclosure if it exceeds a set value. This will stay like this for the rest of the day until the cycle starts to reverse back down through each zone at the approach of sunset. In this enclosure, I'm also using for the first time an LED system for the provision of UVA and UVB. Unlike traditional fluorescent ultraviolet systems, LEDs have the advantage of being dimmable. By using a smart dimmer, I've been able to completely synchronise the output of UVA and UVB with the heating system. The overall effect with these systems working together is to create a thermal and lighting environment where conditions in different parts of the enclosure change throughout the day. The thermal gradient is effectively on the move, and the lighting regime is also synchronised with nature. This encourages the inhabitants to constantly regulate their behaviour to suit, just as they would in the wild. And regulation of the enclosure environment doesn't end when the day is done. The visuals of sunrise and sunset are themselves simulated through the use of a 12-volt LED strip light. Once local sunset is complete, the strip is used to simulate a moonlit night. And just as occurs in nature, the burrow temperature throughout the night is held at a stable 24 degrees in both chambers. Central netted dragons won't be the only living residents here. The LED ultraviolet system produces light so close to mimicking sunlight that it is suitable for growing plants. So I've built in a planter box, and in here I'm growing an iconic grass of the Australian desert. This little guy is Spinifex. It grows into a dense clump, which is a favourite hiding spot for desert lizards. I can't wait to see how the nether dragons utilise this one as it grows. And this is why I've included the second water solenoid. Each day, 5 minutes after sunset, the Spinifex will enjoy a few drops of water while the dragons sleep. All of the life support systems in this build run on either 12 or 24 volts, so I was able to wire the entire thing myself. There are a few transformers and a fuse block to protect the wiring in the event of a short circuit. The smart relays also have a provision for physical switches, which can be used to operate the systems manually at any time. And here we have it. I'm really happy with this one, but more importantly, I think these little guys are too. I really do think these little guys are jewels of the Australian desert, and with this build I wanted to emulate to some degree the way we typically present things of great value, say a precious gemstone in a museum or gallery, for example. It really strikes me as quite strange that most Australians have no trouble whatsoever identifying something like a diamond or a sapphire, but if you presented them with one of these little guys, they would have no idea what they were looking at. There's no shortage of channels on YouTube promoting the cheapest or easiest way of setting up an enclosure for a reptile, and by now you'll realise that my channel is about neither of those things. I'd really like to see people involved in the hobby put a lot more effort into setting up homes for these incredibly specialised little animals. By the way, it's a bit remiss of me not to have introduced these little dragons to you earlier. In here we have all of our dragons from the opening sequence: Blotchy Bob, Grassy Lady and Butternut. Now, I made the mistake of naming them a little bit too early, and as they've grown I've come to realise that it's actually a bit more like this. So with that in mind, by the end of winter, the Grassy Lad will need his own enclosure. One of the things I was frustrated with on earlier builds was having lots of smart switches, but then having a lot of those operating across different platforms. And while it worked, it was also a real dog's breakfast in terms of trying to keep track of all the functions. This time everything is on the one app, and it really makes it so much easier to seamlessly keep track of all of the different scheduling and different functions. I've moved all of the manual switches down a bit lower and out of the way, and I've made a change to the scheduling in the middle of the day. I've just introduced an oscillation between zone 1 and 2 just to further make sure that the enclosure environment remains active. I'm going to sit back and enjoy watching these little guys for a while now. I do have another exciting build on the way, so to make sure you don't miss out on that one, make sure you like and subscribe. Until then, thanks for watching.